Hello again to my world history students. So this last video of our China unit is going to focus on our people, groups, and culture standard. And so I wanted to just bring up a few of the key questions that go with the standard. This is part of that key questions and master study guide that you have. But again, with cultures, the key idea here is always that what makes this group of people unique? And so when we look overall, we might start to look at what they believe, how those beliefs might change. Later on in the semester, we'll talk about some of these beliefs causing cooperation or conflict. We can look at the daily lives of people, and then we start to look at the social classes and how maybe those social classes may act differently or have different roles within society for that. And so, and men, women, and children you can see here as well. So we'll be touching on a lot of these different components throughout this video as we discuss what culture is like during the Chinese Golden Age. So the first component we're going to deal with is this idea of what people believe and how those beliefs influence their life. And one of the dominant cultural ideas, both in the Chinese Golden Age, as well as 1,000 years before the Chinese Golden Age, and carrying even into modern Chinese society, is this idea of Confucianism. And a lot of people confuse this with religion, and it's not so much religion as a philosophy to live your life. So Confucianism is not concerned with any aspects of spirituality or any of those out of this world type of concepts. They're worried about how can we engage our society as it is right now to make our society better. And so prior to the Golden Age, Confucius ideas have been in China for about 1,000 years. And even people that don't necessarily follow Confucianism can still identify a lot of those characteristics within Chinese society, especially when you contrast it against more westernized civilizations like those in the United States and Europe. So the first major idea that drives the set of ideas of Confucianism is the concept of filial piety. And knowing those would be new words for you, they are spelled for you on the screen. So when you talk about filial, you're generally talking about family responsibilities. And I'm sure if you think about it, you can think of lots of responsibilities that family members have for each other. And that's what's included within this. But then there's that extra word of piety, which generally refers to as like faithfulness. So when you put those together, you end up with a very strong faithfulness towards your family responsibilities. And that's what filial piety is all about. You have family responsibilities, you need to put those in the forefront of your life. And so with that, we have this core idea of Confucianism that family always comes first. So when family always comes first, that means that your individual needs are always underneath that of what will benefit the family as a whole. And so you have responsibilities within your family, and your family has certain things that will continue to allow them to be successful and drive them forward. That becomes more important than anything you have naturally on your own as an individual. And so we don't see much of the individual drive that we see in our westernized cultures as we do in these cultures that really follow Confucianism strongly. These go as far as one of the examples I usually use in class would be what happened if something happened in your family and that required you to stop all of your future career dreams and come home and take care of a sick family member. A lot of individualist cultures, like those that we live in, focus largely on like what's good for me and how can I blend what's good for me with what my family needs. And so we might say something like, well, I'll just make a lot of money and then I'll send it home and make sure that family member gets a live-in nurse and we'll really take good care of them. But that's not okay in Confucianism, because in Confucianism, they say the family comes above all of your individual desires. And so you would have to quit that job that made you millions of dollars, come home and take care of your family member. Even if you could financially care for them otherwise, they want you there. And so that's one of the big cultural things that we see within this, is that constant respect for family as well as your ancestors and always putting the family first. One of the other components of Confucianism, and this would fall as that next hollow bullet on your screen, is working together in harmony, or you might often hear harmonious cooperation. And the word harmony shows up a lot in Confucius ideas, that we are all supposed to work together. We are all supposed to get along, and as we all work together to maintain harmony in our society, a lot of the problems that divide society go away, because we're all working together and everything we're doing is trying to make us get along better than we did when we were focusing on ourselves. And so the last piece that we have here that we want you to understand when we talk about Confucianism is that every person has a role in society and must perform the responsibilities of that role. So we'll repeat that again, that everyone has a role in society and they must complete the responsibilities of that role. And so you can see the 5 relationships on your screen. And as Confucius describes the 5 relationships, he says that for most of those, you will be at some point in your life on both sides of it. So, except for that middle one, of course. So you might be the older sibling, but you might also be the younger sibling. And so you will probably be a parent at some point while still being a child to your parents. And so as we look at all of these, there are certain responsibilities that come with these. And so as you look at your responsibilities, Confucius says that if everyone performs all of their duties, society will flourish. It will become as great as it could possibly be if everyone performs the responsibilities they're supposed to in all of these roles. And if you start to think about it, it starts to make sense. It might be idealistic. Maybe it's going to be really hard to make it work in reality. But the idea that if we just focus on the middle, if the ruler is supposed to provide for the people that he's ruling and take care of them, and the ruled people are supposed to obey the ruler, they might not have any reason to go against them because their needs are being met by the government. And so if they do what they're supposed to do and the ruler does what he's supposed to do, everything works out. Consider the same thing with parents and children. If every parent was always putting their children's needs as a priority and every child was obedient and focusing on honoring their family, there wouldn't be this disruption in society because everyone would be getting along in harmony. Children knowing that their parents were looking out for their best interest in honoring them, and parents always actually looking out for their parents' best interests. So yes, it's ideal, but that's these core ideas that are driving Confucian society when we're looking through these concepts for people, groups, and cultures during the Golden Age. Another big change in the Golden Age society was, as we mentioned in our previous videos, there is now a civil service exam where any person can take the test and become a government worker. We also know society is doing better because there's more money pouring into it. And so the combination of these two things will cause the creation of the gentry class. So that is the creation of the gentry class. And the gentry class is a rich middle class that focuses their lives on passing the civil service exam. So again, that's a rich middle class that focuses their lives on passing the civil service exam. So we call them a middle class because they're not up there with the ruling classes, but they're not poor anymore because they're investing their resources into getting their children into school so they will pass that civil service exam. When they pass that civil service exam, they make money and they bring more honor to their family. That's part of those Confucius ideals that now if I can go honor my family by passing this test, I will make all of us more successful and elevate the status of my family in society. And so we now see this whole new social class of people that came from not having a lot of money, but they're getting money now because they're successfully passing this test and getting high honorable government jobs. and the high-paying government jobs. And so as this starts to happen, now we all of a sudden see, I'm going out of order on my slides here. Let me rearrange. We also see that the lower classes become more successful also. And so again, this is part of being in a golden age, that lower classes also become more successful. And so now we see a new class of the gentry. We see the lower classes rising up with their regular life. And then through both of these, now that they're being more successful, there is more leisure activity. So, and that's the one, as you can see there, we want you to have multiple examples of new leisure activity. And so there are lots of leisure activities that show up during this time. There's things like the game of chess, which now that we're not having to work all day, every day, we have time for these fun things. And so chess has worked its way into China from India at this point. They start to create things like playing cards because now they can print and make copies more easily. Things like the paddle boats, where you go around and you paddle around a lake as just something fun to do. They also start having more markets, and we start to see in some of the biggest cities, the first in the world of the 24-hour markets that are going 24 hours a day, where you can go and shop anytime. And if there is shopping going on 24 hours a day, people get hungry. And again, another new invention that happens during this Chinese golden age. Well, now we're shopping, we're hungry. Maybe we should open up a place, a new shop where we're serving food. And that's what we see in this yellowed picture in the middle, is one of the earliest restaurants. And so we also see the creation of restaurants happening. So again, you can stay there in the markets even longer, spend some money on some food, and then go spend some more money in the market to buy more stuff. We're seeing a very just exciting changing economy, and these are things that you're not seeing in a lot of other parts of the world at this time. So the last thing that I'm going to show you a couple examples of dealing with leisure activities. During the golden age, there also starts to be a lot of poetry and painting. And so we see a lot of China's greatest poems and a lot of China's paintings come out of this. So I'm just going to show you a couple examples here. Here's an example of a poem, and I'll read it out loud to us. Excuse my pronunciation on this one. Chuang Tzu in a dream became a butterfly, and the butterfly became Chuang Tzu at waking. Which was real, the butterfly or the man? Hopefully that gets you to think a little bit. And that's what we're starting to see, is this reflection on poetry. There's always this focus on nature throughout this time also, through their poetry as well as through their paintings. So here's a few examples of the types of paintings that would come out of the Chinese Golden Age. Again, very nature focused. This is a very unique style of China, where you can see just the nature scenes and even the birds, which have an extra story, and that the birds were painted by an emperor who spent so much time enjoying nature that he ended up losing a lot of his empire, causing largely the end of the Golden Age by sitting there and spending a lot of time thinking about nature and painting birds and stuff like that. Our last element of Chinese society and culture during the Golden Age is that women's rights get worse. And I really emphasize worse, because China has never been a place of really great women's rights. Historically, it's probably one of the worst places a woman would want to live. And now that things are going great for the society as a whole, things get a whole lot worse for the women there. And so let's walk through a few ways that things get bad for women in this time. So first of all, now that there's this emphasis on the civil service exam, baby girls are unwanted, as in from the day they are born. Girls aren't wanted in the family. And there's a few reasons why. One of them is they aren't allowed to take the civil service exam. So again, girls are unwanted. They can't take the civil service exam, which means there is no possibility that that girl will grow up to be able to bring lots of money to the family with a government job. And you will see these are largely in that gentry class, because that's becoming this new special class that we're seeing a lot of. One of the other problems that the Chinese society sees with a baby girl is the concept of a dowry. And basically a dowry is, it's intended where the father of the girl gives money to the new husband. That could be a property, it could be a lot of food, but they're giving a gift to the new husband. And the intention behind that is to start a new life. If I give a new piece of land with a house on it, that's going to help this man take care of my daughter. But it starts to almost become a bargaining chip where men will start to see who will give them a better dowry price. And that starts to become very expensive for these wealthy men also. And so in addition to not being able to earn wealth, they will actually cost the family money as they start to get older. So just another example of how women's rights get so bad is that they are not allowed to have any individuality. So as in, they're not allowed to have any desires of their own. They're not supposed to want anything. They're not supposed to even want to spend time doing things like poetry or having fun like the men in these houses are doing. So the women are expected in this time in China to essentially focus on taking care of the household. And as a result, they can't express any of this, the personal side of what makes us individuals and what makes us feel like we have a purpose and a joy in life. This gets so much so that they're not even allowed to show their face in public. And that's what the picture on your screen is showing. A wealthy woman, and this would include the gentry in this case, would, if they need to travel outside the home, would generally cover themselves up. And you can tell they're wealthy because they are being carried by people at the front and the back, but they aren't supposed to show their face in public as they are moving from one place to the next. In terms of as the woman gets older, the expectation is that she's going to take care of the house, which means that as she gets older, gets married, she will end up moving into her new husband's family. And one thing we did not really talk about on the Confucius slide, but it still fits, is there's a lot of families that have multiple generations in the same family. So you might see a Chinese family where you are seeing of course, the parents and their children, but they're still living with their parents and potentially even one more generation below that. So you could see 4 to 5 generations living in a single household. So as a girl, as you get older, you're going to spend your childhood not learning how to read, but learning how to complete housework or farm. And as you then get old enough to get married, you will take those skills and move in with your new husband's family. And so you are literally moving in with your husband's family, his parents, potentially his grandparents, likely his brothers with their children, and having this big family all living together. And that's a normal part of that filial piety type of society. But you're essentially going in as a foreigner. And your job is basically to maintain this house with your new husband and the other women in the household. Now, if you're rich enough where you will not have to do a lot of work, if you aren't going to have to go and spend a lot of this time, there's another way families try to indicate that. And so this is going to enter our last concept here. So we should have that women aren't wanted, they can't make money for their families. You should have that there's no individuality. You should have that they are living with their husband and his family, doing housework. I don't know if I emphasize those points enough, but that was the last one there. And then the final one that is a very unique feature to China is the concept we call foot binding. So once again, that is foot binding. And the purpose of foot binding is to show wealth by making the girls more pretty. And I say that from their cultural point of view, because most of us don't see foot binding as a way to make women more attractive, but it was a sign of attractiveness in Golden Age China. And so what they would do, and I'm going to bring in a quick illustration of how to handle this, is starting from a very young age, they would start to wrap a girl's feet so that as they grow, they're going to be growing wrong. And as you can see here in these pictures, you take a normal foot and you twist it around, and you will be breaking the bones of the foot to do this also. So as it heals, you can continue to make it smaller and smaller. And as you have these tiny feet, that is considered a sign of beauty in China. I did put a warning on here. If you don't like to see images like this, I do have several photographs that I'm going to bring on the next slide. So feel free to look away and still listen as we're looking through this. You're not required to see what's on the next screen by any means if you think that it's going to gross you out too much. So what you can see now is, look on the top section, you can really see those tiny little shoes. And the goal was, the smaller the shoes you could get in, the prettier the feet. That also means this family is so wealthy that they know their daughter will never have to work. Because if you think your daughter might have to work, you can't afford to foot bind her, because then she wouldn't be able to be productive. Because it does get very hard and very painful to walk on those tiny little shoes with your broken feet. You can see a few ways and even several modern pictures of this. This custom is illegal in China today, and it's not common except for some of those rural villages where they're not as advanced in some of the cultural changes that have happened throughout China. And so it is something you can still see in China. It's just not very common. And it's usually in those small little farm villages that are not really accountable to what's going on in the law, since it is against the law in China today because of the long-term damage that you're doing. But again, this is just another symbol of how women's rights are getting worse as China enters its golden age. And that's a very unfortunate consequence, because a lot of golden ages in other societies, we see women's rights start to increase. And we just don't see that here. So a quick refresher of what we have been addressing here. We have talked, so I'm going to bring us back to this slide. We have talked a little bit about how the people live their lives and how they are living in a single household with lots of people. We have talked about how they are focusing on passing that civil service exam. We've talked about their belief systems of Confucianism and how those Confucius ideas, in this case, would help lead more to cooperation in the society. We've talked about social classes a little bit, of the gentry specifically, and what the gentry is focused on now. And we've talked about the roles of women in this case, and how those are a little bit different from the men in the society. So once again, when we look at these key questions, those are designed to help you revisit these concepts and help you really have a good understanding of the people, groups, and culture standard. Please reach out to me if you have any questions or concerns or feedback about this. You also have access to my office hours as needed if you'd like to discuss these any further or ask any questions. This is the last video of our China unit. At this point, you should start to work through making sure all of your questions and summaries are put together, as well as beginning to review so you can be really successful on the first major assessment we have for this first unit. Wish you all the best. Please contact me with any questions you have.